The first lightning talk will be by Serge Belongie, who is professor of computer science at Cornell, and since this year is also associate dean of Cornell Tech. His research interests include computer vision, machine learning, human in the loop computing, and mixed reality. He's also co-founder of several companies, including Digital Persona, Anchovy Labs, and Orpix. So let's give him applause, and looking forward to your talk.
Thank you for the invitation and the introduction, Christoph. I'll skip the intro slide since Christoph already covered these topics. I'm going to give lightning coverage of 3 different research directions from my group at Cornell Tech. And the first one, Peter actually gave us some good foundations for this one. It has to do with fine-grained category recognition with humans in the loop. And this is about humans and machines working together to identify fine-grained categories, such as species of animals. So this refers to a project called Visipedia. And there are certain people that possess very specific knowledge about categories like fungi or birds. And they know the special terminology. A lot of us like birds or like mushrooms, but we don't know the specific terminology to describe all these things. We just know it when we see it. So the idea with Visipedia is to capture and share that visual expertise. And one of the things we tap into is that there are many, many citizen scientists and hobbyists out there that collect large catalogs of images and annotations online. And we all know people who like going bird watching or who are fans of lemurs or World War II biplanes. So those communities have these fantastic resources available. And with Visipedia, we reach out to those communities and find ways to build AI tools to help them organize and discover data in those domains. So one of the central ideas here is the complementarity of what's hard for humans and machines. The task on the left is quite easy for humans. Is that a chair? Is that an airplane? Is it a bus? We all know how to answer that. That's an entry-level or coarse-grained category. The task in the middle is much harder. Is that an indigo bunting? Is it a blue grosbeak? So that's hard for humans unless you have this special expertise. But if you break it down into simple questions about parts and attributes, like what you see on the right, then it actually becomes easy for everyday observers. Is the belly yellow? Is the bill black? So if you can break it down into these kind of field guide type questions, then you can transfer that knowledge. So that brings us to this idea of a visual 20 questions game, where an image can come in and pass into this so-called computer vision block. And I just use that block to represent the entire field of computer vision. And Peter gave an overview of some of the old-fashioned features that people used to use before 2012. And when we first developed Visipedia, it was before that deep learning revolution hit. So the motivation here was that you would have a computer vision block that looks at the image of the bird, tries to come out with some so-called posterior probability of the species of bird given the pixels. But it would only disambiguate. It wouldn't give you exactly what the species of that bird is. And then that would kick off a game of 20 questions that would adapt to the ambiguity that you observe from the computer vision decisions. So in the visual 20 questions game, you would select the next question to maximize the expected information gain. So you'd have a lot of training data and lots of questions that are available about parts and attributes, and then you could narrow it down. So it kind of turned it into a game. However, as Peter said, around 2012, everything changed. And I use this joking term here, antediluvian, to describe what happened. It's a play on the word antediluvian, before the flood. So pretty much everything that our field did before 2012 just got washed away. So that computer vision block got completely changed. And all of the pipelines now use deep learning. So it turns out that this idea of the visual 20 questions is only necessary up front a little bit when we're pilot testing these systems, and then it can rapidly be fed back in as training data to a deep learning-based system. As a result, it just becomes a play of humans and machines interacting to collect well-curated data sets. So one of these data sets, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology helped us create it. And that started out with North America and has expanded to about 100 bird packs that cover all of the globe. And this now appears in this free app called Merlin with or Merlin Bird Photo ID. And you can download this on your phone. And you can't fit all the models on a, well, maybe you can fit them all on a modern iPhone. But when you go on a trip to go birding, you can download the model and get these excellent results from this deep learning-based system. From there, we were inspired to create a series of workshops going beyond birds to all sorts of plants and animals, as well as man-made objects. So I'm not emphasizing it here, but also handbags and shoes and interior design and so forth, working directly with communities that know how to taxonomize and organize this kind of data. Peter also made reference to the concept of transfer learning, which suggests that if you have trained a system to recognize birds, it could give you a really nice head start on recognizing butterflies. So you can do this so-called domain transfer to make the training faster. So from birds, we went to about 26,000 species of plants and animals that now can be recognized within the iNaturalist app, which is also free. This comes out of the California Academy of Sciences. So you can download that on your phone. This one runs in the cloud. So as long as you have a cell signal, you can recognize tens of thousands of plants and animal species. So that whole first part was very much supervised machine learning. So like Peter said, when deep learning first took off, it was on this subset of machine learning where you've got labeled inputs and you're getting these specific categories labeled on the output. In part two, we're dealing with a semi-supervised problem. So this is something where you want AI to provide more exploratory tools for you. You may not know what things are called, but you want to capture some notion of perceptual similarity, the way that humans who may have expertise, for example, in pathology, or maybe just humans who have general expertise about plates of food or meals, how do you capture that notion of perceptual similarity? So one of the traditional ways to do this is with paired comparisons and a Likert scale. But this is pretty tricky because there are differences in calibration across different users. What does it mean to be a 4 on this scale of how similar these foods would taste? Then you've got things like a dessert that uses carrots and real carrots. So instead, what we focus on is relative comparisons of the form, is A more like B or C? And those kinds of things are really easy for people to report. And you can do this efficiently using a grid-based system where you could show a probe image like carrots, and then a grid that could be up to 25 images. But here we have a grid of 9 images. And you could ask people to click on the 4 out of 9 that are more similar to the carrot than the other ones. It's a forced choice. It's 9 choose 4. You may not always have 4 things that are worth clicking on, but it turns out that it comes out in the noise that if you just have people do this kind of thing and you say, these foods look like they taste more similar to the carrots, the other ones look like they'd be more far away, you can create these networks that capture that notion of similarity. So instead of having these specific classifications from, say, a plate of food to specific, say, 1,000 categories of food, we use those same networks just for the features that they learn. So instead of saying this has to be pho or bibimbap, we just take the features that were learned in that deep network, and we use it to capture this idea of what is more similar to what. So it addresses these issues like, what do you do if it's the same food in different states, or if you have something like guacamole versus wasabi? That, if a human looks at that, you could say, well, I can take the context into account. Guacamole and wasabi locally look quite similar, but you would probably lean toward wasabi with your human intelligence based on the context with which it's presented. So these are things that can be captured with that kind of relative comparison style of data. There's also these weird things that can happen with taxonomies. I don't know if this is actually real, but this is like a crossover between wasabi and a chocolate Kit Kat bar. So you probably wouldn't have a category for that pre-enumerated. So this brings us to this algorithm that we developed called SNAC, Stochastic Neighbor and Crowd Kernel. For those of you familiar with low-dimensional embeddings, there's a technique called T-SNE. It's student T distributed stochastic neighbor embedding. And it's a well-known technique that takes very high-dimensional data and projects it down into a small number of dimensions, usually 2 or 3 dimensions. So it's used to visualize high-dimensional data in an easily digestible form. So that bottom left pipeline there that just comes straight from deep learning just takes a pre-trained deep network, looks, in this case, at an image of a plate of food, and produces some features. And on its own, if you didn't take into account the human expertise, then you could produce this so-called T-SNE embedding at the bottom right that puts things that, like similar tasting food, into neighboring clusters within the so-called concept embedding space. But with the SNAC algorithm, we have a side channel that takes all of those clicked grid responses and those relative notions of similarity and puts it into the same algorithm with some weight so that it influences the embedding that you find. As a result, you can take a data set, say, of appetizers, and you can produce this embedding that shows that pastries or things with fruit appear in similar parts of that embedding. And you can also use it for quality control. You can send images of birds to non-experts, put it into the SNAC algorithm without labels, find things where it looks, for example, on the right, there's a green cluster with a strange blue dot near the top. And it turns out that if you look at that in the embedding, it's actually a mistake. It turns out that dot shouldn't be there. And we went back to the person that labeled that data, and they said, yeah, that was the wrong woodpecker. So that was something where we had a semi-supervised algorithm that was able to detect something was anomalous, and we could correct it by talking to an expert. So with part 2, what we're talking about is producing these kinds of explorable embeddings that in a medical setting might be used for dermatopathology or for cancer analysis. These images happen to be birds, but it could be used quite broadly for a kind of visual thesaurus. Now, the last part on the surface does not appear related, but if I think about how users in the future will experience this kind of technology, it probably will be through some form of augmented reality. And as a result, I've made augmented reality a high priority within my lab. And we developed a projective laser-based approach called PointAR. So it falls into the mixed reality spectrum where I'm showing it here. This is not virtual reality. This is an augmented reality approach. And among all the different techniques that are out there, from things like HoloLens, Oculus Quest, projective AR, what we're doing falls under the projective side, but is extremely simple. And what we're focusing on is the case of teleassistance, helping people do things where you have a remote expert and then someone who needs to solve a problem. Now we're focusing on the essence of this, which is pointing and talking. So when you're showing someone how to do something, the talking is very important, but it's also helpful to be able to point to something. And that doesn't require millions of polygons to be rendered in a fancy AR headset. It actually turns out that just projecting a dot can be extremely useful. So this brings us to the concept of PointAR. And in the interest of time, I'll just move quickly. We built a prototype for a system that uses a laser pointer, a 5 milliwatt laser pointer on a little turret with 2 servo motors. And you can control it remotely. For example, you would work with a remote home professional. And that person could point to things on their mobile device. And then you have an actual physical unit that's pointing the laser at a target. So this is just a prototype. It's obviously too big at this point. But the idea with PointAR is that you can initiate a call through something like FaceTime, and then once you need that assistance in a very targeted way, you can have the remote professional you actually interact physically in your scene by projecting that dot. So I'll just skip past this part. So we envision that this will be part of these future systems that understand the world, allow us to apply human level perception on things around us, and actually indicate things in a spatial fashion without having to wear specialized headsets. So I'm out of time, so I just want to say thank you to my collaborators, and thank you for your attention.